The room went quiet so fast I could hear the ice melting in the glasses. My mother-in-law had just lifted her champagne flute. My father-in-law was smiling the way he always did in photographs, wide, practiced, showing every tooth. 200 guests were looking at the happy couple, celebrating 30 years of marriage in a ballroom my husband's family had rented out for the occasion. The centerpieces were white roses and gold candles. The cake had their wedding photo printed on it in edible ink. Everything was exactly as my mother-in-law had planned it, down to the monogrammed cocktail napkins. And then my husband stood up. I want to tell you I saw it coming. I want to say I felt something shift in the air, that some part of me knew. But the truth is, when he pushed back his chair and reached for the microphone the DJ had left on the head table, I thought he was going to give a toast. I even smiled. I reached for my own glass. He looked at me for exactly 1 second before he looked away. That's when I knew. Let me start from the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. I met my husband 11 years ago at a friend's birthday dinner. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, effortlessly, almost carelessly, like they've never had to try. He laughed at my jokes. He remembered what I ordered. He texted me the next morning before I'd even had coffee. I was 31 and I'd been through enough disappointing relationships to recognize when something felt different. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. We married in a small ceremony in upstate New York. I wore my mother's pearl earrings. I cried during the vows. My husband cried too, and I thought I actually believed that we were the kind of people who would grow old together. What I did not fully understand, when I said yes, was that I was not just marrying him. I was marrying into something much more complicated. My mother-in-law had a way of making her disapproval known without ever stating it directly. She never said she didn't like me. She never had to. It was in the pause before she hugged me. It was in the way she asked about my job with exactly the right amount of polite disinterest. It was in the offhand comments she made at family dinners about how her son had always been destined for great things, about the kind of woman she'd always pictured for him, about how funny it was that life took unexpected turns. I came from a working-class family in Ohio. My mother had been a school librarian. My father had worked construction until his knees gave out. We were not poor, but we were not the kind of family that rented out ballrooms. My mother-in-law had grown up with money and she wore it the way some people wear perfume, present in every room, even after she'd left. She wasn't cruel. That's what made it so hard to explain to people. She was never overtly cruel. She was simply cold in the specific places where warmth was expected. My husband used to defend her. In the early years he would reach for my hand after these dinners and say, "She's just old-fashioned. She doesn't mean anything by it." And I believed him because I wanted to. Because it was easier to believe that than to look at what it meant that he kept choosing her version of events over mine. We'd been married 8 years when things started to change. It wasn't dramatic at first. It rarely is. It was the late nights at the office that became more frequent. The work trips that seemed to multiply. The way he'd angle his phone away from me when he was texting. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I trusted him. I said these things to myself so many times that I stopped really listening to what I was actually seeing. The moment I stopped lying to myself happened on a Tuesday morning in February. I was working from home. I needed to print a document for a client meeting and our home printer had been linked to the shared laptop we kept in the study. I opened the laptop and his email was still logged in. I wasn't looking for anything. I want to be clear about that. I was clicking toward the print function when the screen loaded and there it was, an email thread, right at the top, timestamp 2 days earlier. I read the first line. Then I read the whole thread. Then I sat very still for a long time. He had been with her for 14 months. She worked at his firm. They had been careful enough that I hadn't known, not for certain but not careful enough to log out of a shared computer. The emails were detailed in the way that emails between people who feel safe never get to be. There was one line I came back to, over and over. He had written to her, "I've been putting it in place for the past 6 months. By the time we're done here, there won't be much left to fight over." I took screenshots of everything. I forwarded them to my personal email. I closed the laptop and I went to my meeting and I sat across from my client for 2 hours and I did not fall apart. On the way home, I called my best friend. She came over that evening. We sat at my kitchen table while my husband was at the office or somewhere and she listened to everything. Then she gave me the name of a divorce attorney she trusted. I made an appointment for the following week. Here is what I want you to understand about the 3 weeks between finding those emails and my in-laws' anniversary party. I did not confront my husband. I did not cry in front of him. I did not change a single thing about how I behaved in our house. I cooked dinner. I asked about his day. I went to sleep on my side of the bed and I watched the ceiling and I let the grief move through me quietly, like water finding its level. My attorney advised me to wait. She said I needed to understand what putting it in place actually meant before I made any move. So we waited. And we found out. Over the course of 6 months, my husband had been quietly restructuring his consulting business. He'd moved the majority of his liquid assets into a separate LLC, one that predated our marriage on paper, except that it didn't, because my attorney found the actual incorporation date. He'd had conversations with a financial advisor about long-term projections post-transition. He had spoken with a real estate agent about the value of our house without telling me. He was planning to leave me with as little as possible. And he was planning to do it on his own timeline, in his own way, without ever giving me the chance to prepare. I had 3 weeks to prepare. My attorney filed documents quietly. Copies were made. An emergency financial disclosure order was already in motion. Everything was in place. And then my mother-in-law's anniversary party arrived. I wore a navy dress. I did my hair the way my husband always said he liked it. I sat beside him in the car on the way to the banquet hall and we talked about the weather and whether we'd be able to find parking, and I handed him his gift for his parents when we got out of the car. He held the door open for me. He put his hand on the small of my back as we walked in. The ballroom was beautiful. I'll give my mother-in-law that she had impeccable taste. The lighting was warm and low. The tables were dressed in ivory and gold. A string quartet was playing something I recognized but couldn't name. Everywhere I looked, there were people I'd spent 8 years learning the names of, learning the histories of, learning how to navigate. My mother-in-law greeted me at the entrance with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You look lovely," she said, and moved past me to greet my husband with both hands clasped around his face. I found my seat. I smiled at the people around me. I drank a glass of water. My best friend was 3 tables away. I had asked her to be there, and she had rearranged her weekend without asking me a single question about why. The evening moved the way these events do: speeches from old friends, a slideshow of photographs, rounds of applause, more champagne. My father-in-law spoke for 10 minutes about what 30 years of marriage had taught him. My sister-in-law gave a toast that made half the room cry. And then my husband stood up. He adjusted the microphone. He cleared his throat. He looked out at the room with the easy confidence of a man who believes everything is going according to plan. "I want to say something tonight," he began, "because I think honesty is the foundation of everything that matters." I set down my champagne glass. "My parents built something real," he continued. 30 years of genuine commitment. And I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about what that means. About what it takes to live with integrity. About what it means to stop pretending. The room was very still. People were smiling, assuming this was headed somewhere warm. My mother-in-law was watching her son with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Not pride, exactly. Something more like satisfaction. She knew. I understood then that she had known. "The truth is," my husband said, "my marriage hasn't been real for a long time. And I think it's time I stopped pretending otherwise. For everyone's sake. Especially mine." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than before. Confused. Uneasy. 200 people looking at each other and then looking at me. I felt it, the heat that comes up from your chest when you want to cry or scream or disappear. I felt it rise and I breathed through it. I thought about my mother, who had been dead for 4 years, who had held my face in her hands the last time I saw her and said, "You are so much stronger than you think you are. You always have been." I stood up. I didn't ask for the microphone. I simply stood, and the room looked at me, and my husband's expression, that careful, composed expression, shifted by exactly 1 degree. "Since we're being honest," I said, and my voice was steady, which surprised even me, "I think this is actually a good time to share something too." I reached into my clutch. My attorney had returned everything to me in a neat folder 2 days ago. I had taken 1 page from that folder, 1 specific page, folded it carefully and placed it in my bag that morning. I unfolded it now. "This is an incorporation document," I said. I was speaking to the room, not to my husband, because the room deserved to know what kind of man they were applauding. "For a company my husband formed 8 months ago. A company designed to hold assets that, according to our marital estate, belong to both of us. This document shows a filing date of 4 years ago. I paused. The court documents we filed this week show the actual date. I heard my mother-in-law make a sound. I didn't look at her. My attorney has already been in contact with the relevant parties. Everything is filed, everything is documented. I refolded the paper. I just thought, since honesty is so important tonight, that it was worth mentioning. I sat back down. The room did not applaud. It did something almost more powerful. It turned, collectively, slowly, toward my husband. And my husband, who had planned everything so carefully, who had moved money and consulted advisors and smiled at me on the drive over, had nothing prepared for this particular moment. He sat down too. My best friend appeared at my side within 60 seconds. She put her hand over mine on the table. Her car was in the parking lot and she was already holding her keys. I stood again, quietly this time, and we walked out together. The weeks after that night were not simple. I want to be honest about that because I've noticed that stories like this tend to skip the hard part, the part where the thing you did in a ballroom has to translate into the rest of your actual life. I moved into a short-term rental 2 days after the party. My best friend helped me pack what I needed: clothes, documents, the small painting my mother had given me, the photo albums I had assembled over 8 years of marriage. I did not take anything that wasn't mine. I did not need to. My husband called twice the first week. I let the calls go to voicemail and forwarded them to my attorney. My mother-in-law did not call. My sister-in-law called once, and I answered, because she had always been kind to me in the small, quiet ways that counted. She didn't say much. She said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know." I believed her. The legal process was not quick. It was not clean. It required documents and depositions and hours in conference rooms with fluorescent lighting. But it also worked. The LLC was ruled a marital asset. The financial disclosure revealed accounts that hadn't been disclosed. My attorney was very good at her job. I won't pretend I didn't grieve. I grieved the marriage I thought I'd had. I grieved the version of my husband I'd believed in. I grieved the decade of my life I'd spent being careful, being accommodating, working hard to belong to a family that had never fully made room for me. What I didn't grieve was the moment I stood up in that ballroom. Not once. About a month after the party, while I was unpacking boxes in my rental, I found a small envelope at the bottom of a bag I hadn't opened in years. It was tucked between 2 books I'd had since college. My mother's handwriting was on the front, just my name, nothing else. She had written it when she was sick. I had known about the letter but forgotten where I'd put it. I sat down on the floor of my half-unpacked apartment and opened it. She wrote about a lot of things, small things, the way mothers do when they're trying to give you everything at once. She wrote about the way I used to read to her when I was little, making up words I didn't know yet. She wrote about being proud of me. She wrote about love. Near the end, she wrote something that I've returned to many times since. She wrote, "Don't spend your life making yourself smaller so other people feel comfortable. You were not built to be a background character in someone else's story. You were built to be the whole thing." I held that letter for a long time. Outside, the evening was going on as evenings do, cars passing, someone's dog barking, the ordinary texture of a life continuing forward. And I thought about the woman who raised me, who worked 30 years at a school library for a salary that never reflected what she gave, who drove me to piano lessons and stayed up late reading my essays and told me the truth even when it was hard. I thought about what I had learned from her, slowly, over all the years that had felt too quiet and then suddenly felt too loud. I thought about the difference between keeping the peace and actually having peace. They are not the same thing. I know that now. I'm not going to tell you that everything was fine after that. It wasn't. For a while. There were nights in that rental apartment when I lay in the dark and replayed every moment, looking for the things I'd missed, the choices I might have made differently. That kind of review is both necessary and merciless. I let myself do it, and then I let myself stop. Here is what I know. I know that standing up in that ballroom was not the most dignified moment of my life by anyone's conventional definition. I know that some people at those tables thought I had made a scene. I know my mother-in-law told people a version of events in which I was the unstable one, the one who had blindsided her son. I know that version of the story is still circulating somewhere in that social circle, at dinners I'm no longer invited to. I also know what the alternative was. I know what it looks like to find out, 6 months later, after papers have already been signed, that you didn't have to accept what was given to you. I know too many women who walked out of courtrooms with less than they deserved because they didn't know in time, or because they were too afraid, or because they had spent so many years making themselves small that they'd forgotten they had the right to take up space. I was afraid too. I want to be clear about that. I was terrified standing up in that room. My hands were not steady the way my voice was. The paper shook slightly when I held it, and I held it anyway. Fear is not the opposite of courage. They coexist, and you choose, in each specific moment, which one you're going to lead with. My divorce was finalized 7 months after the party. I kept the car. I kept a portion of the marital assets that reflected what I had actually contributed. I got to keep my life, which sounds like a strange thing to say, but it's the truest way I know to say it. I took a trip alone for the first time in years somewhere I had wanted to go since I was 23, somewhere my husband had always found a reason to postpone. I sat in a cafe in a city where no one knew my name, and I ordered exactly what I wanted, and I watched the people passing by, and I felt something I had almost forgotten how to feel. Uncomplicated. Not happy exactly, not yet, but uncomplicated. Like a room when all the furniture is finally in the right place. My best friend came to visit me in the new apartment I eventually rented, a real one, with a room for an actual home office, with a kitchen I slowly filled with things I chose myself. We sat on my balcony with wine, and she said, "I still can't believe you did that." "Which part?" I asked. "All of it," she said. "The waiting. The preparation. Walking out instead of making it worse." I thought about it. "I had a really good teacher," I said. She looked at me. "Your attorney?" "My mother," I said. We sat there for a while after that, not saying anything. Below us, the city was doing what cities do, relentless, indifferent, full of everyone else's lives moving forward in ways we couldn't see from where we were sitting. Above us, the sky was that particular shade of deep blue that only happens just after the sun is gone and before the dark takes over completely. I've thought a lot about what I would say if someone asked me to explain what the last year of my life was about, what the lesson was, what I would want another woman to take from it, if she's somewhere in the middle of her own version of this, lying awake, replaying things, wondering if she's imagining what she already knows is real. I would say, you already know. Somewhere below all the reasons you've been giving yourself, you already know. And knowledge is the one thing that can't be restructured or hidden or transferred to a shell company. It stays yours. I would say, the moment you stop making yourself smaller to fit inside someone else's plans, you will take up exactly the amount of space you were always supposed to take up. It will feel uncomfortable at first. That discomfort is not a sign that you're wrong. It's a sign that you've been too small for too long. And I would say, find the people who show up with their car keys without being asked. Build your life around those people. Everything else is just furniture. My mother's letter is framed now, on the wall in my home office, next to the window that gets the afternoon light. I see it every day when I sit down to work. Some days I don't read it. Some days I just glance at it and feel the specific weight of it, the weight of someone who loved you unconditionally, who is gone now, who somehow still manages to tell you exactly what you need to hear. I am not the same person I was the night I sat down in that ballroom in a navy dress and let my husband hold a microphone. I don't think I'm supposed to be. I think that's the point. You don't come through something like this unchanged. You come through it clarified. Like water that's been filtered, the essential thing is still there, cleaner, more itself than before. I am 36 years old. I have a job I'm good at and an apartment with afternoon light and a best friend who shows up when it counts and a letter from my mother on the wall. I have the version of my life that I chose when I finally stopped letting other people choose it for me. That's not a small thing. That's everything.